Tonight, let me tell you a story about a great stone garden, a quiet little village, and a giant who had forgotten how to share. It is an old story written by Oscar Wilde, but its heart still feels tender and true. Because sometimes what makes a place beautiful is not its walls, or its trees, or its flowers, but the joy that is allowed to live there. So settle in now, take a slow, peaceful breath, let the day soften around you, and listen to the gentle tale of the selfish giant. In a quiet corner of the world there stood a wonderful garden. It belonged to a giant. The garden was large and lovely, filled with soft green grass that shimmered in the sunlight. Here and there, delicate flowers grew like little stars scattered over the earth. There were peach trees too, and in the spring they blossomed in pale pink and pearl white, filling the air with sweetness. In autumn they bore rich fruit, glowing warmly among the leaves. Every afternoon, after school, the village children would come and play there. They ran laughing across the grass. They climbed the trees. They played hide and seek between the trunks. They lay beneath the branches and looked up at the sky. The birds sang above them, and the whole garden seemed happier because the children were there. "How happy we are here," the children often said to one another. Now the giant who owned the garden had been away for many years. He had gone to visit a large and rather gloomy friend in a distant land, and there he stayed far longer than he should have. But at last, one day, he returned home. When he arrived and saw the children playing in his garden, he frowned at once. "What are you doing here?" he cried in a great booming voice. The children were frightened and ran away. "This is my garden," said the giant. "Everyone must understand that. I will allow nobody to play here but myself." And so, in his selfishness, he built a high stone wall all around the garden. Then he put up a sign upon it. "Trespassers will be prosecuted." He was very pleased with himself. "I have my own garden now," he said. "It is mine alone." But the children had nowhere beautiful to play. They wandered sadly along the road after school. They tried sitting beside the dusty walls, but there were no flowers there, no cool grass, no trees to climb, no bird song in the branches. "How lovely the giant's garden used to be," they whispered. Soon, spring came to the countryside. Across the village, flowers began to open. Birds returned to their nests. Trees stretched themselves awake and covered their branches with tender leaves. But inside the selfish giant's garden, it was still winter. The birds did not care to sing there because there were no children to listen. The trees forgot to blossom. Once, a little flower lifted its head out of the grass, but when it saw the sign on the wall and remembered that the children were not allowed inside, it felt so sad that it slipped back down into the earth and went to sleep again. Snow covered the grass in a cold white cloak. Frost painted all the trees silver. The north wind came and roared through the garden every day, wrapped in furs, and hail danced wildly on the roof of the giant's house, beating it like a drum. "I cannot understand why spring is so late this year," said the giant as he sat by his window and looked out at the frozen garden. He hoped the weather would change, but spring did not come, nor summer. Autumn gave golden fruit to every other garden, but to the giant's garden she gave nothing at all. "He is too selfish," she said. And so it remained winter there, while everywhere else the world moved gently through its seasons. The giant sat in his cold house and watched the snow, the frost, and the wind. never quite understanding why joy had left his garden. And one morning, something changed. He was lying awake in bed when he heard the sweetest sound he had heard in many years. It was so soft and beautiful that he thought, at first, it must be the king's musicians passing by. But it was only a little bird singing outside his window. The sound was so lovely after such a long silence that it seemed to the giant like music from heaven. Then he heard another sound, a light, cheerful rustling. He rose from his bed and looked out, and what he saw filled him with wonder. Part 2. Through a small hole in the wall, the children had found their way back into the garden. They had climbed in quietly, and now they sat among the branches of the trees. And wherever a child sat, the tree above that child had burst into blossom. The branches stretched happily around them, covered in white and pink flowers. Birds fluttered through the air and sang with delight. The grass beneath grew green and fresh once more. Here and there little flowers peeped out of the earth and smiled. It was spring at last, at least. In most of the garden, in one far corner, winter still remained. There stood a little boy, so small that he could not reach the branches of the tree nearest to him. He walked around it, trying again and again to climb, but he was too tiny. And because he could not reach the tree, that corner was still covered in frost and snow. The tree bent its branches down as low as it could, as if trying to help him, but still the child could not climb. The giant watched all this from the window, and suddenly his heart, which had been hard for so long, began to soften. "How selfish I have been," he said. "Now I understand why spring would not come. It was because I kept the children out. These are the ones who make the garden alive." He looked again at the little boy in the cold corner, and he felt pity, deep and tender pity for him. Very quietly the giant went downstairs and opened the front door. He stepped out into the garden. The moment the children saw him, they were frightened and ran away. And as they fled, winter returned to every place they left behind. Only the little boy did not run away, because his eyes were so full of tears that he had not seen the giant coming. So the giant walked gently toward him. He lifted the child carefully in his great hands and placed him into the tree. At once the tree blossomed all over. Birds came singing into its branches, and the little boy threw his arms around the giant's neck and kissed him. When the other children saw that the giant was no longer angry, they came running back, and with them came spring. "It is your garden now, little children," the giant said. Then he took a great hammer and knocked down the wall. By noon, when the people of the village were going to market, they saw an amazing sight. There was the giant, standing among the children in the most beautiful garden they had ever seen. All day long the children played there, and at evening, when the sky turned golden and soft, they came to the giant to say goodbye. "But where is your little friend?" the giant asked, "the small boy I lifted into the tree?" For the giant loved that child best, because the child had kissed him. "We do not know," said the children. "We have never seen him before today." The giants felt a strange sadness at this. Still, each afternoon the children returned, and the giant played with them and watched over them. His garden was now filled with laughter, birdsong, blossoms, and life. Years passed. The giant grew old. He became too weak to play running games, but he would sit in a large chair near the window and smile as he watched the children at play. "I have many beautiful flowers," he said, "but the children are the most beautiful flowers of all." Yet he never forgot the little boy. Again and again he asked the children if they knew him, if they had seen him in the village, if perhaps he would come back. But no one knew who he was, and the years continued, quiet and gentle, like drifting leaves. Part 3. One winter morning, many years later, the giant awoke and looked out from his window. He did not hate winter any more. He knew now that it was simply the season when the earth rests, and that spring would always return in time. Still, as he looked across the garden, something caught his eye. In the farthest corner stood a tree covered in the most beautiful white blossoms. Its branches shone as if made of silver, and beneath them the ground glimmered with golden light. It was strange, for it was still winter everywhere else. Filled with wonder, the giant rose from his chair and went outside. There, beneath the tree, stood the little boy, the very same child he had once helped into the branches. The giant's face lit with joy. "My little friend," he cried, "at last you have come back." He hurried across the garden, smiling, his old heart full of warmth. But when he came closer, he stopped, for on the child's hands there were marks, and on his little feet there were marks too, as though they had once been wounded. "Who has dared hurt you?" cried the giant, his voice trembling with sorrow and anger. "Tell me, and I shall take my great sword and punish them." But the child only smiled softly. "No," he said, "these are the wounds of love." The giant stood very still. A deep quiet fell over the garden. Then he knelt before the child, and suddenly he understood that this was no ordinary child. The child smiled at him with great tenderness. "You once let me play in your garden," he said. "Today you shall come with me to my garden, which is paradise." That afternoon, when the children came running to the giant's garden, they found him lying peacefully beneath the tree. He was very still, and he was covered in white blossoms. So ends the story of the selfish giant, a giant who had everything, yet lived in winter, until he opened his heart, and then at last spring returned, because love has a quiet way of melting even the hardest frost, and kindness, once welcomed in, can transform even the loneliest place into something full of light. So if tonight your heart feels tired, guarded, or closed by the heaviness of the world, may this story remind you gently that warmth returns, that softness returns, that joy returns. Sometimes all it takes is letting it in. Good night.